Hello there, CodeMaker4 here. This video turned out to be very long, so it's going to be split up into multiple parts. The parts have their own titles, so you'll know what we'll be discussing. But in general, we'll be making the full timer memory module with a block-to-block tutorial, because we'll be making the three parts that it consists of in a way that you can build it yourself and you can customize it for your own needs. There are also simply blueprints in the description, although watching some of the videos will help you understand how it works and how to use it properly. Anyways, back to past version of CodeMaker4, and let's roll the actual intro. Hello there. CodeMaker4 here. This outro machine still falls over. About 9 months ago, I published the SMC2. It was a nice computer, and it had this amount of memory. This ginormous thing, it's absolutely ginormous, contains only about 64 bytes of memory. So what was necessary is to create more memory on the computer, right? So you might say, oh, we do something genius like taking this thing and duplicating it a bunch. Let's duplicate it 4 times to get 256 bytes of memory. That's like a quarter kilobyte. Still not a lot, but it should be more than enough, right? Well, what then happens is that you end up with this ginormous monstrosity. This here only stores about a quarter kilobyte of memory. So I was thinking and looked through the blogs of Scrap Mechanic. Isn't there some form of abnormal way in which you can store memory? Maybe you can make a wheel spin in a certain way. Maybe you can, rotate a stop sign in some way. And then I went back to the logic things and said, oh, maybe you could do weird colored paint stuff. Oh wait, you can't actually paint stuff yet in Scrap Mechanic using logic. And we have pistons, but none of these are as useful as the timer. Because the timer does something weird. So this timer, if you, I'm just gonna make this be 10 seconds long. So you might say that a timer would work like that. If you'd given it an input, it would wait 10 seconds before it actually has an effect on the output, right? And that's true. So let's set it to 1 second, so I don't need to wait as long. So if I press the button, it takes 1 second before the light turns on. And if I release it, it also takes 1 second. And if I set the time to more length, like 5 seconds, it will take 5 seconds before my button press has an effect on the output of the timer. So the input of the timer is delayed by 5 seconds. But what's interesting about the timer in Scrap Mechanic is that if you give it a sequence, a bunch of pulses, then that same sequence of pulses is going to go through the output at some point. So if I want to store some data like 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, as an example, we get an output 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. And you might get where we're going, right? If you create a loop of all of this, and you hook up some more logic, I have a nice OR gate here, I could input some data like 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, and it will always keep outputting that 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, whatever I inputted, and it will keep outputting it forever and ever. What this means is that we just stored actually quite a bunch of data in here, in just this tiny space. Of course, getting the data in and out in a proper way is easier said than done, but it's still not that hard. This module here uses timer memory to store 256 bytes of memory. Remember, usually we would need this amount of space on the gates to store 256 bytes, but now we can just put it in this tiny chunk. So in this video, I'm going to teach how to build your own module. There'll also be a link in the description to this exact blueprint for the lazy persons. So let's get going, I guess. So as you can see, this timer memory module is made out of 3 distinct parts. Each of these parts has its own purpose. This part here keeps track of what address is currently actually being outputted by the timers. This part here contains the timers that actually store all the data, and some logic to manage the input and output, or changing the data in the timers. And over here we have some temporary memory for the output. So I think that it's the easiest to simply start with the counter. This here isn't just a counter, and it's a special type of counter that can increment every single tick, and that also, if you would look at the output continuously, it will always be actually giving the correct output. Usually, if you have a counter, you'd have the first byte check if it overflows. If yes, it will go to the second and set it to switch, and if it overflows, it goes to the third, which is a ripple counter. And that it works. But the thing is that the last bytes are kind of lagging behind. So instead, we'll make a counter that will use some timers to compensate for this lagging behind. So these timers here are on a low amount of time, and these over here are on high amounts of time. So let's build this counter. First of all, we need to build the first byte of a counter, of course. So what do we need? We need a bit of memory. So I'm going to be using extra memory. That's because extra memory can flip instantly. Other forms of memory need longer pulse length, or need some extra care to make sure that they do stuff correctly, which takes extra time. Extra memory does have the disadvantage that it's only a T flip-flop really. But that's a form of memory, and in this case, it's actually all we need. So this here is a single bit for the counter. And as you can see, as long as I hold the input to make it increment, it will increment continuously. It looks a bit weird because of frame rate limitations, but trust me, this thing is flickering at as fast as it can. We want to be able to duplicate this bit. Let's quickly do that. We're gonna save this as unnamed, and just to quickly copy and paste it. It really doesn't matter how you weld this together. And what you're gonna do is we are going to be having this one button input, right? And as long as this button is held, the timer will be incrementing every single tick. But the thing is, this won't work, because as you can see, they simply both flip. Instead, we need to connect these together. If this thing is turned on, and it's going to flip, it's about to turn off, which is basically meaning that this single bit is about to overflow, and I should toggle. So instead of hooking the second bit right up to the counter, we need to check if it's going to flip and if it's going to turn off, which means if it's on now and it's going to flip, then I will flip too. And now we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and back to 0. But you can just keep repeating this, right? So if I remove this button again, save this as unnamed, duplicate it a bunch of times. We now have a 2-bit timer, right? That can count to from 0 to 3. So now basically you have two 2-bit counters, right? And we need to hook them up to each other. So the second counter will increment, so this gate will turn on if if the last bit of the first counter is about to switch, and it's going to switch from high to low. So it's currently turned on and it's about to be switched to off, which means that this last bit has overflowed, and that overflow should go to the next counter. But now we have a 4-bit counter. 1 and 0. And I will just take these and build them another 2 times. Hook these up together. Once you get the drill, we have an 8-bit counter now. So if we would hook this up again, I'm not going to go through the entire sequence. So what's interesting about this type of counter is that you can hold the button and it will count properly. What's also not nice about this counter is that it's a ripple counter, meaning that there's basically the effect is going to ripple through the entire counter. Let me demonstrate. So if you look at the counter right now, when I'm going to press this button, all these should turn off and this should turn on. But let's actually watch what happens in slow motion. As you should hopefully be able to see with the slow motion footage, is that this here turns off first, then that one, then that one, then that one, then that one, then that one. So instead we'll be using the nice space we've left here to place down some timers to compensate for this. So we are going to be hooking up these timers to the memory, because the memory is the output, so we're basically hooking them up to the output. But now we need to set all the timers to a length that is always one longer than the one to the right of it, basically. So this one is set to 0, this one will be set to 1 tick, and this will be set to 2, 2, not 3, 4, no, 3, sorry. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's basically it. So now if you hold this down, and you might want to, hook up some outputs maybe. Yes, lamps aren't the best output, but I'm going to use them anyway because I can. So these timers are the output now. So as you can see, we now have a counter that can count every single tick. So what this here is going to be keeping, let's remember what the role of the counter is. The role of the counter is to keep, you see you have this timer loop, right, that's containing all the data. And the role of the counter is to keep track of what data is currently on the inside of the gates on the point in this loop, where we can actually manipulate and read the data. And the timer is going to keep track of what address is actually in there currently. Although the other addresses of memory are going to be stored inside of the timer. So let's now build this module. But there's one difference. You see, maybe you want to only have 64 bytes in your memory, or maybe you want to have the glorious 2 kilobytes. Well, in that case, this is the point where you need to start customizing this thing. I'm going to just continue for the route of 256 bytes of memory, so a quarter kilobyte. But if you want to have more memory, you need to make sure that that this counter contains enough bits to loop through all your addresses. So say you want to only have 64 bytes of memory, then you only need a 6-bit timer. So you can just, at this point, just delete the end of this, right? Or if you want to have more memory, like you want to have 1024 bytes, then you need to add some more modules to this. If you want some more info on how much bits is required for how high amount of memory, I had to refer to my old binary tutorial. It's an ancient video, but I do still think that it's just good enough to be worth referencing. I might do a better binary tutorial in the future, in which case the links in the description will be changed to that better binary video. But yeah, go to that to quickly get up the basics of binary and how this all works. So that concludes the first episode of this series, to go to the next episode, you can just do nothing if you're actually watching the playlist, or go click the link in the playlist in the description down below. Yeah, that's basically it. There's nothing for you to do here. The video is over.